The wind that January afternoon cut through Evelyn's coat like broken glass. She watched Clayton Mercer's broad back disappear through the crowd, his boots striking the frozen mud with the confidence of a man who'd never faced consequence. Around her, the people of Dry Hollow stared with expressions ranging from pity to disgust, but mostly just hunger for gossip they could chew on through the long winter nights ahead. Her hands shook, not from the cold, though Wyoming in 1887 possessed a cruelty Philadelphia winters had never prepared her for, but from the sudden, overwhelming understanding that she'd gambled everything on a man who'd lied in every letter he'd written. "Miss?" A porter touched her elbow. "The train leaves in 15 minutes. You still got your return ticket?" Evelyn opened her mouth. Nothing came out but a wheeze, barely audible above the wind. The porter's expression shifted from polite concern to uncomfortable recognition. He'd already heard then. Word traveled fast in small towns. "Right," he muttered. "Well, good luck, I suppose." He left her standing there beside her trunk, a battered leather thing that had belonged to her mother, filled with clothes meant for a wedding that would never happen and a life that had just dissolved like smoke. Inside that trunk, 3 dresses, undergarments, a Bible she hadn't opened since her sister's funeral, sheet music she could no longer sing, and at the bottom, wrapped in her grandmother's shawl, the last photograph of her family before fever took them all. $23 in her pocket. The return ticket Clayton had promised never existed. He'd told her he'd take care of everything once she arrived. That's what his letters had said. Come west. Marry me. Build something new. Lies, as it turned out, looked identical to hope until you stood in the middle of nowhere holding neither. A woman approached. Older, maybe 50, with gray hair pulled back severe and eyes that had clearly seen too much frontier bullshit to be shocked by much anymore. She wore a simple brown dress and a coat that had been mended more times than replaced. "You plan on standing here till you freeze, or you got some survival instinct left?" Evelyn tried again. Managed a whisper, like, "Save it." The woman's voice wasn't cruel, just practical. "I'm Ruth Callahan. I run the boarding house on 2nd Street. You need a room. I got one. $3 a week, meals included. You need work. I can point you toward it. But nobody in this town gives handouts, and most of them are mean as snakes if they think you're weak." Evelyn nodded, not trusting even her whisper. Ruth studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Christ, you really can't talk, can you?" Clayton wasn't lying about that part, at least. She picked up one handle of the trunk. "Come on, then, before someone decides to rob you blind. This ain't Philadelphia." The boarding house sat at the edge of what passed for Dry Hollow's main street, a collection of wooden buildings that looked like they'd been thrown together by people too tired to care about aesthetics. Everything leaned slightly, worn down by wind that never stopped, and winters that killed the unprepared. Ruth's place was cleaner than most, at least. 2 stories, white paint peeling, but the windows looked solid and smoke rose steady from the chimney. Inside smelled like coffee and old wood and something cooking that made Evelyn's stomach clench with hunger she'd been ignoring since dawn. "2nd floor, end of the hall," Ruth said, leading her upstairs that creaked with every step. "Bathroom shared. Hot water on Tuesdays and Saturdays if you're willing to haul it yourself. Don't steal from other guests, and don't bring men up here. Not that you look like the type. $3, first week up front." Evelyn counted out the money with trembling fingers. Ruth took it without comment, then handed her a key. "Supper's at 6. You miss it. You don't eat. Breakfast is 7. Same rule." She paused at the door. "One more thing. People here don't got patience for delicate Eastern ladies. You want to survive winter, you'll need to work. There's a tailor shop down the street, Han's place. Chinese fellow, been here longer than most of these bastards, but they still treat him like dirt. He might have sewing work if you got the skill. Otherwise, there's laundry, cleaning, cooking for the saloons. None of it's pleasant." But it's what das Lands." "Thank you," Evelyn managed, barely audible. Ruth's expression softened just slightly. "Don't thank me yet. You ain't made it through your first week." The room was small. Narrow bed, 1 chair, a wash basin, a window that looked out on the back alley where someone had abandoned a wagon with a broken wheel. Evelyn sat on the bed and stared at that wagon for a long time, thinking about things that break and get left behind. Her voice had been everything once. She'd sung in church choirs, at society gatherings, at her sister's wedding 3 years before the fever came. People had called it remarkable, not just pretty, but powerful. The kind of voice that could fill a room and make people stop talking, stopped moving just to listen. Then last spring, the illness hit. Started with a cough, became pneumonia. The fever nearly killed her, and when she finally woke up in the hospital, her throat felt like someone had taken broken glass to it from the inside. The doctor said she was lucky to be alive. They said her vocal cords were scarred. They said she'd probably never sing again, and speaking would always hurt, always sound damaged. Lucky, they'd called it. When Clayton's letters arrived 6 months later, found through a matrimonial service her aunt had secretly contacted, they'd felt like salvation. He'd written about his successful cattle business, his large ranch, his desire for an educated Eastern wife who could help him build something respectable in Wyoming territory. He'd seemed kind in his letters, understanding. He'd said her voice didn't matter, that he valued intelligence and character. More lies. She'd seen his face when she stepped off that train. The way his expression shifted from anticipation to disappointment to disgust in the span of 3 seconds. She'd tried to speak, to explain, to apologize for not being what he'd imagined, and he'd called her broken goods, in front of everyone. Evelyn lay back on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling until the light outside faded to gray, then black. She didn't cry, couldn't afford to. Tears were for people who had time to feel sorry for themselves. She had maybe 6 weeks before her money ran out completely. The tailor shop was small